Welcome to Three. I'm Gil Gross, joined as always by Amy Lundy. But on this week's episode, we have special guest Simon Cambers, a renowned journalist in the sport and someone who's just worked very, very hard on a Roger Federer piece. As Indian Wells begins and none of our big three are participating, we thought this would be a great time to talk about Roger and through the lens of what Simon has done with his latest work, the Roger Federer Effect, which is just released in the United States. So, Simon, congratulations on that, and we appreciate you joining us.
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me. It's great to be on, and lovely to talk about Roger Federer.
Yeah, and we'll also get to some Indian Wells stuff towards the end. And Goran Ivanisevic just did an interview. I don't know if we've taken in that. I believe, Simon, you do some work with tennis majors, so you might have been onto that one as well.
Yeah, I do. I've seen that.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. I will ask the obligatory question to an author. And by the way, you also did it with Simon Graf, or unless he goes by Simone. I'm not sure.
I think he goes by both. Simone in his own country in Switzerland, but Simon elsewhere, probably.
Perfect. The obligatory question to an author would be, why did you choose to write this? Like, how did that come about? And also what I'll say is, it's not a typical biography. It kind of works as one, but it's not from the kind of 50,000-foot view of a biographer. It's also not from Roger Federer's view. It's from the perspective of the people in Roger's life who he affected and touched in certain ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you know, there are a lot of books about Roger Federer out there. So trying to write another one of the same kind would have been a bit pointless, really, and I don't think would have worked. But Simon Graf came to me because he'd had a thought a few years ago when he was in the queue at Wimbledon and was talking to people about what he was doing there, and they were telling him that they were there basically to see Roger Federer. It wasn't to see Wimbledon, it was just to come and see Federer. And it struck him that so many people from all different walks of life were drawn to him for whatever reason, not just because of his tennis and the way he played his tennis, but for other reasons too, his personality or how he went about things, what he said and how he acted. So Simon came to me and asked if I would like to co-write it because I think together we had a good spread of contacts across the tennis world, and then ideas about how it might work in terms of contacting other people, not necessarily in tennis, but connected to tennis in different ways. So we had musicians, we had politicians, we had film directors, we've got photographers. We spoke to Mary Carrillo as a commentator about what it's like to commentate on Roger Federer. And we tried to get a sort of an overall view. As you said, it's not a chronological biography. It's not a straight, it doesn't encompass all his wins and losses and high points and low points, but it tries to tell his story through the eyes of those whose lives he impacted. And I hope we did a good job. There were people we couldn't get, and there were areas that we couldn't get to, but I really enjoyed writing it. And I know Simon did too, because everyone loved to talk about Roger. That's the first thing. People were very happy to talk about him. But they all had interesting angles on it too. It wasn't just a sort of Roger's great book, although of course there's a lot of that because he did such a lot of good things in the sport. But there are a lot of different things in it. So I hope people have enjoyed it who've read it so far, and if not, we'll go out and buy it and read it and enjoy it too.
Simon, great to finally talk to you, by the way. I love the way that you structured the book. I think it's a different way to do it, and I'm definitely drawn to just the overall structure because I feel like I know the story. I've read the story chronologically, or the biography of Roger Federer. My question would be, it's hard to get anyone to say anything not negative, but kind of with an edge about Roger Federer. I mean, in many ways, he's got a halo over his head in all aspects of his life. Did you have a hard time really digging out the golden nuggets to try to paint a picture that wasn't just all positive?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's funny, just to go back to the structure for a second. That took us quite a while because we didn't want it to just be a collection of interviews shoved together, because that would be a bit simple and maybe it would sort of go up and down and come back around. We tried to get a structure where we would put it, as you said, with the effect he had on people, but it was through their eyes. So whether he was a student or whether he was a peer or a rival, etc. And it's great to hear that you like that. Yeah, on the edge, one of the first people I spoke to was Sergei Stakovsky, the Ukrainian player, not playing anymore, of course, and is now fighting in Ukraine, which is just unbelievable. But I spoke to Sergei because I'd known him a little bit over the years, and I knew what kind of person he is. He's outspoken. He's not afraid to be different and be difficult. And I thought, well, no, this will be interesting. Let's start with someone who might have a different tack on Roger. Obviously, he beat him at Wimbledon in 2013. And that was the biggest moment of his career. But I wondered whether, I thought, well, he'll probably dish a bit of dirt and say Federer was a bit of a pain behind the scenes and this stuff. And out comes all the stuff about how Federer was lovely to his mom and, how he set the scene, and working with him behind the scenes was great because they helped to improve prize money and stuff. So it was surprising to me that there was it wasn't surprising that there was not more of an edge to Federer. I mean, years ago, I had to write an article for The Age newspaper in Melbourne, and they wanted somebody, and they did, none of their staff wanted to write this, but they asked someone from outside, i.e. me, to write a piece about, what's Federer really like? Is he really that nice? Has he got an edge? And it took so much effort to try and find anyone who would say anything bad about him. And I think even the ones who, pointed out little things that were not great, like Mary Carrillo talked about when he wore the 15 jacket straight after beating Andy Roddick at Wimbledon, with number 15 already prepared. And a lot of people at the time thought, oh, does he really need to do this? This is a bit too much. And Mary said she thought it was a misstep. So there were little things like that. But overall, of course, it's positive. I mean, it wouldn't have been possible to write. We wouldn't even have thought of the concept of writing the book about Federer if he didn't have such a positive impact on people around the world. I think it'd be a lot harder to write a book like that about someone who really, sort of divided opinion. That would be equally interesting, but would be difficult. But yeah, it was pretty hard to find.
And it seems like the reason for that is personality, because it's one thing as fans, let's be honest, we watch these players on television. Fans around the world don't know these people as human beings, and therefore their fandom is largely based on how they play tennis. But when you're talking to people who were in Roger Federer's life on a personal basis, like Marco Ciudinelli, for example, who knew him from childhood, their perception of Roger is not about how he plays tennis. It is about personality. I'm curious, though, how the personality, in your eyes, created the player. Like, what's the marriage between what Federer is as a human and how that affected what he became and was able to do as a tennis player? Do you know what I mean?
Question. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I've always thought that players' playing style basically mirrors their personality. It's very hard to play against type. Although I do think, and I actually ended up writing something for New York Times about this once, or maybe it was ESPN. The Marin Cilic is a case in point to me. He's a huge guy. I've always wondered why he just doesn't hit the hell out of the ball all the time. But to me, he's probably quite a sensible person inside and doesn't want to make mistakes. And so he reined it in too much. Whereas I think Federer as a youngster, as the Swiss all talk about, we've all heard the anecdotal stories about how volatile he was. And Sven Grunewald tells the good story about how he tried to sort of gently punish him when he threw his racket through a sponsor's sign at the back of the court. I think that the sort of volatility in his game that you saw as a teenager is his personality. But you mature, players mature. So his personality in terms of the aesthetics, he loved everything about being number one, didn't he? He loved everything about being the man in the sport. And it sort of went along with his game. He hit the most beautiful shots. He hit unbelievable shots that you couldn't even dream of. And when you're talking about the way the personality matches what's on court, I think the two chapters with the two super fans that we spoke to, they sort of give you a good idea of what he was like, even to people who he has no reason, he would never mix with or would never meet those kind of people in normal life. But because of his tennis, he did. And yet he remembered their name. He always came up with something interesting to say to them, a little bit like he did in press with us. Always thought about the question, always came up with something a little bit different, even though he'd been asked it millions of times before. I guess there's a lot of good parenting in there in terms of his personality. That it's no surprise. Anyone who is that way has been well brought up, and he sort of, everything was well managed. There were very few missteps along the way. So in terms of personality, I think his game mirrors his personality in terms of aesthetically pleasing. Of course he's got an edge. Every champion's got an edge, but I think the two match.
I have a question about your opinion on the end of his career. You've got a pretty good picture now of who this guy was. You've talked to all these people, did all these interviews. Is he going to be satisfied with the way it all ended?
I mean, it's really hard to know for sure. I mean, I saw him at the Labour Cup, so that was very much in the moment of the end. And he was incredible in the build-up to it. He did so many interviews, it's a joke. I think he spoke to everyone who was there in one form or other, whether it was in a group or on their own. And he definitely enjoyed the ending. It probably couldn't have been any better. But I guess, he wouldn't be, I'm sure that he would not, there are things about the end that he won't like. He won't like that he lost a 6-love set at Wimbledon, where he owned the place. Where the last time he walked off the court as a player, he lost 6-love. I think that would be grating. He won't like that he was not able to go out on his own terms. I don't think any athlete enjoys that. He would feel, in 2019, he was still playing incredible tennis, should have arguably, had 2-point match points to win Wimbledon again. So there's not that much difference in terms of age, etc. at that age. But then again, I think once he realized that the knee was just not up to it, then there's no sort of second guessing anymore. It's not like he lost or he was losing matches that he shouldn't have lost anymore. He just couldn't do it physically. And even now, that knee is not ready. It's not ready to go skiing properly. It's not ready to, play. The exhibitions haven't been lined up yet. So I'm sure that it's going to take a bit of time. I'm sure he'll miss it a lot, but I'm sure he'll be around tennis too. And, there's already talk about him popping into Wimbledon to do a bit of analysis and commentary. He'll be really missed, but I don't think he will. I think he's come to terms with it. I think he must have done, but it helps that there was an injury in the end.
What about the Grand Slam tally?
Yeah, what can he do about it? I suppose once I'm sure he would have loved to win more than anyone else, but he can't influence it. He can't do it anymore. What he probably should have won 2019 Wimbledon, so that would have been one more. But Rafa and Novak would have overtaken him anyway. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure that bothers him too much. There are plenty of records around that he still owns for now. For now, at least.
This question comes in from Joel Drucker, our third host. What are one or two of your most memorable Federer interview moments, whether it be at a press conference or in a one-on-one situation?
I interviewed Roger on top of Nike Town in New York in about 2007. It was when Tim Henman was about to retire. And it was interesting. It was just between times when Federer was not with IMG and he wasn't yet with Tony Godstick on his own. Mirka was handling everything, his wife. So she was in the background, just on the phone, scribbling notes, doing stuff while we were talking. And he was great. So it was a normal interview. I think I was doing it for Reuters at the time. So we covered lots of subjects, US Open coming up at the time. But Tim Henman was also retiring. And as a British journalist, and as a freelance, you're always thinking about different stories you can get out of one interview, and how you can make as much money and get as much publicity out of it. So I'd done all the questions I needed from Roger himself, but then I said, you're pretty good friends with Tim Henman. Have you spoken to him about his impending retirement? Because it had just been announced. And he sort of looked at me and, remembered that I was British. You could see it going through his mind ticking over. What does he want here? Oh, okay. So he said, yeah, I texted him yesterday, and we're going to practice before the US Open together. And, and then I'll sort of help him towards his retirement. And that was enough to go in a tabloid newspaper, a good, daily newspaper at home in Britain, on the back page of the sports section. And he knew that, he knew the impact his words would have. So I always enjoyed that kind of thing. He was brilliant for if you were writing a feature piece, so not a match report or anything, but you have a general idea and you've spoken to a few players along the way, but you need a big name at the top to make it interesting or to draw people's attention in. He was fantastic for that. So you would just get everything else done, go to him. Again, he would just sort of sum up what was happening and figure out what you were looking for and give it some real thought and give you an answer. And because it was him, it carried such an impact. So I always enjoyed, whether it was one-on-ones or press conferences with him, because he just always tried to give an answer that was different to the last one he'd given when he was asked the same question, 2 weeks before. He must have done, I wonder whether we could find out how many interviews he's done at some stage. It must be, well in the thousands in terms of just pure press conferences. So, for him not to get really bored, and remember he was doing it in 3 languages, one after the other, English, French and Swiss German. It's incredible that he didn't get really bored. There were a couple of times he snapped a little bit when he was really angry after losing the match that he shouldn't have done. But you understand that because all players do that. But he still eventually comes around and gives you good answers. So I was always, whenever you left the room after a press conference or an interview or a group interview with Federer, you always thought, that was really interesting. He felt like he was talking to you and not just everyone, which is a real gift, I think.
I do want to ask about the tennis itself, and the other question that Joel put in is how from the way Federer plays can a recreational player learn and attempt some of those things. And I kind of want to also add in, the actual connection that the way he played tennis made with his supporters and his fans. In your series of interviews, how much was it about what was actually going on between the lines that drew people to Federer in a different and unique way?
There's no question that played a big part. I think if he'd have been a boring, moonballer, let's say, then people would not have been as attracted to him. He played shots people hadn't thought of before. I'm not talking about the saber, because plenty of people have tried that sort of thing before. But, he would come up with unbelievable angles, or, the famous smash back off the Andy Roddick smash, which you can look up on YouTube. I think he made people gasp at some of the things he did, like follies, and the sheer enjoyment in his face that you would see when he hit a shot like that. I think that's what comes across to people when they're watching. If somebody's just pretty stone-faced, you don't build that rapport with the player. But he clearly loved playing great shots, and and loved the way he played. I think in terms of whether what you see on courts you can replicate. There are a lot of people in the book. There's a sort of growing theme about don't try and copy Roger Federer, because you're not going to be able to do it. You start thinking, I'll just do this, and it might work once or twice, but it won't work because you're not as good as him. But there are things about being, just being calm under pressure and treating each point the same and just playing. He always looked to me like he played within himself, but he was playing on the edge at the same time, and that's a real art form. He didn't look rushed at any stage. But if you remember, that lots of people have analysed the way he moved along the court and the stillness of his head as he moved across the baseline. That was always a great thing to watch. So, there are little things that people recreational players can definitely get from watching Federer. But I think the sheer joy he took in hitting outrageous shots is something that made the fans warm to him even more.
You talk to a lot of current professionals. I just want to take this to Indian Wells, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Carlos Alcaraz, the #1 seed. As Alcaraz came up, there was kind of a rush from everyone to say, oh, he plays like Federer. Oh, he plays like Djokovic. He plays like Nadal. And we were hearing all three. It was kind of fascinating. I'd love your take on what part of Federer you see in Alcaraz, but also just talking to younger professionals. You talked to Stefanos Tsitsipas, to name one, who looked up to Federer. What is I'll use the title of the book, The Roger Federer Effect on this next generation of players, and if you could kind of bring that to India Wells as well.
I think he inspired those players to play the game. That's what Matteo Berrettini said. He watched Federer and he wanted to be like him. That's why he hits a one-handed backhand. That's why he hits that slice. Tsitsipas was the same. He didn't want to hit a two-hander because Federer played with this beautiful one-hander that obviously wasn't as good as his forehand, but became a massive shot later in his career. And the variety in it with the slice was so impressive. But I think a lot of people saw the way Federer played and thought, I would like to be like that. That's what I want to do. And it's not easy to play tennis. Tennis is not an easy game at all. Not an easy sport to be good at. And so for any of these players to try and follow Federer was a tall order. But I think that's what he made them want to play like him and to enjoy the game the way that he enjoyed it. Was probably what they were inspired by most. To come back around to Alcaraz, I think what Alcaraz shares with Federer most, and Federer was his hero, wasn't he? I think that it's the intuitive desire to take the initiative in every single rally. There's no point. Even though he plays long rallies because he's young and he's happy to tear around the court and leg it and do whatever he needs to do. He wants to take the initiative. He wants to attack. And he can do it from defense immediately like Federer can. Turning defense into attack is something he's very good at. And I think there's just nothing in his brain that says, let's just rally here. I'll wait for my opportunity and see what happens. I'm going to take the initiative. Tsitsipas is the same. He's another one who wants the match on his racket. Whereas other players are happy to sort of, be a little bit more defensive, sort of. It's not, maybe defensive is not the right word, but more patient, more just wait for a little bit longer before pulling the trigger. And I think these younger players see Federer and see the way that he took matches by the scruff of the neck and realize that that's something special. I mean, even Nick Kyrgios, who we didn't get to speak to, we tried, but we will try again if we get to update the book. Kyrgios has spoken about how no one made him look more of a fool on court than Federer. He could just take the match away from him. And I think someone like Alcaraz can do that as well. And as he progresses, hopefully he stays relatively injury-free in his career. As he progresses, he's going to be more and more aggressive like that.
Thinking about Indian Wells, how it's kind of like the convention or the gathering point for a lot of business interests in tennis, and Tennis Channel will shoot its bag checks for the year, and there's sponsor obligations, and it's kind of a meeting of the minds of tennis. It makes me think of what Roger is going to do in the next phase of his life, and this is probably the biggest change or transition that he's ever, maybe outside of having children, that he's ever experienced. And he's going to have to learn how to navigate that. And it's not going to be easy for him. If you had a guess, and I won't hold you to this, what do you think he'll do?
I mean, I think in the early, I can't imagine him being a sort of, week in, week out coach of anyone. I can't see that. Not yet, anyway. I mean, maybe once his kids have grown up and moved away, then maybe he might fancy it. I think he will get involved with mentoring young Swiss players in a different way. Maybe they come to him to train, and that a little bit like Agassi and Graf, the way that some players rock up there. on invitation only, of course, and get a hell of a lot out of that. I think he'll be active with his foundation, the Roger Federer Foundation, which is for underprivileged children in Africa, because obviously with his mum and the connection with his South African mother. So I think they'll be the first things in his mind. But I mean, he's going to be in demand, isn't he? He's going to have a lot of requests, a lot of people wanting him to get involved in business. Does he really want to get, to become sort of an investor in businesses? I somehow doubt that. I mean, what's the point? He's got enough money anyway. He earns seemingly $100 million without playing every year anyway. I think he'll want to make a difference, though, whatever he does, whether it's his foundation or whether it's with young Swiss tennis players. He'll want to be involved. Even though I don't see him being a coach week in, week out, he'll be around tennis. I think he'll be accessible because he knows. I mean, when we were talking to him at the Labour Cup, he said, maybe it'll just be like I'll pop in somewhere one week and then I'll talk to whoever wants to talk to me, because I know that when Roger says something, blah blah blah, it's important, or it will be seen as important and have some value. So I hope that he is accessible. I hope he doesn't sort of do a Bjorn Borg and disappear for 20 years. I think he'll be around tennis. I think he'll miss it too much otherwise.
I agree. And he did say right on his farewell tour that he wasn't going to disappear on us.
Yeah. And he'll play.
I shouldn't call it a farewell tour, really a farewell stop at the Laver Cup, more so than a tour. Okay, let's go to our colleague Sasha Osmo interviewed Goran Ivanisevic for Tennis Majors. Really good in-depth chat, as always. And I'll just give 3 kind of general takeaways. Simon, whatever grabs you, whatever you think is more interesting, just take it and run with it. So the first thing is apparently Novak found out about the ruling on the U.S. Not letting him in, at least for Indian Wells, before the Medvedev match. And it's Goran's opinion that was weighing on his mind while he was playing Daniil Medvedev. The second thing is that they have not fully given up on playing Miami. They would still like to play Miami, and if anything changes, they're still open to that. Then there were some great details about Novak's attitude on the practice court that really struck me. Like, he was practicing with FAA, and Felix was hitting 220 kilometer per hour, so that would be like 135 mile per hour serves right on the corner, and he would go to Goran and be like, "What am I doing wrong? I'm not returning it." So it was an excellent little interview there. Simon, what did you find most interesting?
Yeah, that stuff, the practice court stuff, is really interesting because it's a big contrast, isn't it, to the way Federer trained during tournaments. I mean, he trained very hard outside of tournaments, but at tournaments, I mean, you or I could have had a hit with him and he would have been fine with it. He only needed 10 minutes or 15 minutes and got on with it. Nadal plays at 100 miles an hour, just smashing the ball as hard as he can. But Djokovic, clearly he's such a perfectionist, and he thinks he should be able to get every serve back. He's the best returner in the world, after all. So to hear him get annoyed at being aced by massive serves is quite funny. Hearing the visa news before the Medvedev match is interesting. The timing of it is interesting, isn't it? Because that was before the USTA said they hoped to see him in Indian Wells and Miami. So that's intriguing. We don't know for sure. According to Goran, it's still Nadal's still the big focus at Roland Garros. That makes absolute sense. And it'll still take an enormous effort from Novak to get the better of Rafa if he's fit in Paris. But it's just, I mean, I think Ivanisevic is still surprised by Djokovic, which is interesting given everything he's achieved. Djokovic, he's 35 going on 36, and he continues to set all sorts of records, and yet still he's surprising his coach, which, is, I suppose, is an indicator of just how good he is.
I like that Novak tried. He tried to appeal to the Department of Homeland Security. He jumped through the hoops to try to make an effort to get over here. That says a lot about a guy at this stage of his career who really doesn't need to play the Sunshine Slam. I highly doubt that it's going to work out for Miami, because the governor of Florida has gotten involved, and he and the president of the United States they're political enemies. So for Ron DeSantis to try to make an appeal to President Biden, I really don't think that it's going to happen. And in this country, as around the world, we have kind of bigger fish to fry than whether Novak can get in to play the Miami Open. But the good news is that this regulation is going to sunset in May, and presumably, knock wood, he'll be able to come back for the US Open. And that will be great to see him. My question to you, Simon, since you're, on the cusp of the tour and all that, is how you see the clay court season playing out.
Well, I think basically all of it depends on the fitness of Nadal. If Rafa is 100% fit, then he will be the man to beat the Roland Garros, no question. He does need time to sort of work himself up to top form. So if he comes back in Monte Carlo, as I hope, then you would imagine that he would be fully fit by then. If he comes back a bit later, maybe in Madrid, then he's pushing it. And Djokovic, what was interesting, I thought, with Goran is he said also that if Novak did get to play Miami, that might not be the best thing for the clay court season, because the time between the two tournaments is so small. And it is pretty hard to go from one to the other and adjust on surfaces and stuff. So maybe it will be better for Novak in terms of his clay court season if he doesn't play Miami. It's really interesting. In many ways, there should be, we should be talking about Alcaraz. We should be talking about Tsitsipas. We should be talking about the others who have great clay court games and who can go a long way. But basically, it comes down to Novak and Rafa. That's it.
Still,
their match last year in Paris was unbelievable. And whoever gets through, if they're in the same half, whoever gets through it, you take to be the favorite again to win the title. And even in their late 30s, they're still the ones to beat. It's fascinating. I think you would imagine if Alcaraz is fully fit, then it might be a bit different this year. It might be different, but still, could he beat both of them? I don't know. I'm not sure. I'd still take Nadal to win the French. That would be my bet right now. But it all depends on his fitness.
Yeah, right there with you. Like, if Nadal and Djokovic have their legs under them, they are still the best players. They've shown that statistically. It was true even last year in 2022. And it'll be fascinating to see Nadal come back. And Carlos Alcaraz, I think, at the ceiling, at the highest capabilities, is the only person who could possibly disrupt that. Yep. Enjoy Indian Wells, Simon. This was so much fun having you on. You did a terrific job with Simon Graf on the Roger Federer effect, and we appreciate this opportunity to chat.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's been nice to talk about. It's a lot of fun to write and a lot of fun to talk about. And thanks again.